Okay, we're going to look at muscle structure next. So, looking at muscle structure, first off, I'm going to get to skeletal muscle shortly. That's the ones I really want to go into the depths and the cellular level in terms of structure. First off, it's just important to note there are three types of muscle structures for us. Smooth tissue, cardiac tissue, and skeletal. So, smooth tissue is fairly common throughout the body. All your arteries, a lot of your organ bases are around this sort of thing, urinary tract, reproductive tract, all that kind of stuff, are all smooth muscle tissue. Okay, so they don't have the same structure. They work through what we call peristalsis. So effectively that's like a wave-like movement that kind of forces all the fluids and so on through their structures. So they're a little bit different to what we're looking at here. Okay, so for exercise-wise, it's worth being aware of them. It's not something we're going to go into great detail on. Cardiac is the muscle of the heart. Okay, so obviously the heart is an organ, but we're looking at the muscle of the heart being the actual structural tissue that is the heart. Okay, so that's cardiac. Skeletal, I look at that as anything that is based on movement. So if we're moving the body, any exercise you can name, a squat, a deadlift, a bicep curl, a shoulder press, they're all movements of the body that we're making through skeletal muscle structures. Okay, so next thing to kind of look at here, if we're going to focus a little bit more on the skeletal muscle structure, we're going to look at how it looks first of all and start to sort of hone in on certain areas. So if we had, again, kind of looking at one bone to another bone, okay, we're looking at two bones in a pair, we've got to have a muscle that joins them. Okay, so there's your muscle belly there. Around this sort of area here on either side is going to be the tendon tissue. So muscle will join a bone via a tendon. So in effect, all the force that the muscle is producing will end up being kind of pinpointed and targeted into this tendon. So there's a greater level of tension through that. That will pull on a bone, an opposite bone, in order to bring one part of the muscle closer to the other part of the muscle. The origin will always be stagnant and the insertion will move towards the origin. So this is your kind of overall structure if we look at it on the outside, okay? What we're going to do though is we're going to break that down and cut into that. So if we sliced up your muscle in half here, we're going to look at what that looks like now. So let's take this side away. And that would be what your structure ends up looking like. So within this muscle structure, you've got gradiated force. So you're not producing your maximum force every time you create a movement. It's all based on the need and the recruitment of the muscle. So within here, you have to have compartmentalized areas for different muscle fiber types and so on. So if we're looking here, this is how it'll look. Within that muscle structure, overall, you have all these different compartments that house different numbers and sizes of muscle fibers and so on. Each one of these is called a fascicle. Okay? So, one thing to kind of backpedal on a little bit is the overall structure of the muscle all around the outside of this tissue will be kind of an outer coating. And that coating is called fascia. Okay? So, surrounding this whole muscle belly is a fascia called the epimysium. So again, MY signifies muscle, all right? Each fascicle itself, so we've cut that up, we've got different segments in here called fascicles. Each of those is surrounded by its own perimysium. So the thing that you'll remember in here is every one of these is a mysium, okay, which means it's a muscle covering. So epi and perimysium. Epimysium goes around the whole muscle belly, and surrounding each individual fascicle, so it's kind of sectioned off, is a perimysium structure. Still fascia, and this will run fluid throughout the entire body. Now, if I was to drag one of these fascicles out, okay, in order to have a look inside there, it's going to look remarkably similar to what we're looking at now, but on a smaller scale. So within here, you have the same looking structure, but each of these here now, within this, is a muscle fiber, okay? So, Each of the fascicles you're looking at, surrounded by the perimysium, is kind of a bundle of fibres. So it's almost like you've put some fibres together, made sure they're all running in the right direction, and put a big elastic band around them, so it holds them segmented from everything else. So these are bundles of fibres. So within here, you've got a series of muscle fibres that I could drag out and have a look at there. And each fibre, again, is surrounded by a fascia. This one is called the endomysium. Okay, I look at endo, end, it's the last one. Okay, so there's no more fascia structure at any deeper level than this. This is what we're looking at in terms of your overall structure. So what we're really focused on is taking out one of these muscle fibers and have a look at it under the magnifying glass. Okay, so if I do that, let's have a little look. At this point, we're talking about very, very, very small structures, but each fiber, if we're looking at a fibre, okay, will effectively house, again, a very similar structure, each of them looking like the same as each larger structure that we've broken down. This is effectively the functional unit of muscle contraction, okay? A fibre houses dozens of myofibrils, okay? M-Y-O, myofibrils there. Okay, this is your functional unit of muscle. So if we were to drag one of these out and look at it, all right, in effect, that's how your muscles contract. So we're now moving into what we call the sliding filament theory. All right, so we're looking at one myofibril, which if you were to expand this back out, the myofibril runs the whole length of the muscle fiber, which obviously then also runs the whole length of the fascicle and the muscle belly. So this one myofibril will be fluid throughout the whole structure until it becomes tendons on either end. Okay, so we're talking very, very small structures here. Now, each myofibril is sectioned off like this. And this is down the entire length of that muscle. Okay, so if we're looking at it like this, each myofibril will look very, very similar to this. What you've got is a Z line here. All right, so each of these is a Z line. I look at that and sort of go, right, I can see a Z there, so that's how I remember that. It's a Z line. And you have protruding protein filaments that come off the Z lines, okay? So each Z line will have these protein filaments attached to them. And in effect, they're going to cross over each other at some point. So this thin filament coming off of there is called an actin filament. And each of these is crossed over slightly by a thicker filament called myosin. So very, very, very small structures. Now, in effect, if you've got actin, and we're looking at it like this, we're blowing it up a little bit, and you've got your myosin here. The myosin has kind of protruding legs on it, a little bit like golf clubs. And what they'll do is they will latch on to little binding sites on the actin filaments, and they'll pull. So if you imagine I'm latching on there and pulling, it brings this point closer to the center of the cell. So now this whole structure becomes microscopically shorter. But this is happening here and here and here and all the way along the chain. So if each of those cells becomes microscopically shorter, the whole muscle is becoming shorter by way of, it's almost like tug of war. They become a little bit shorter as you go. So every time a muscle shortens, this is what's happening. And when it lengthens, there might still be muscle action, but effectively it's allowing it to go the other way. All right, so it's taking off of one binding site, going to the next binding site, and reversing that action. So this, in effect, is right down inside the muscle on every single myofibril, these Z lines. What we've got is like what we call like a mythical line in the middle called the M line, or midline. And all you're doing is bringing your Z lines closer to the M line. That's, in effect, how you're going to shorten muscles.